Aloha everyone and welcome to another Carbon 60 video. I'm your host Kay Elmer, and in this video I'd like to share with you what are the best oils to use with C60. And so the idea here is that right now in the marketplace, if you are buying a C60 oil product to take as a supplement, you've got a lot of different choices and different oils that it comes in. And so let's take a look at what's out there in the marketplace, and then let's talk about healthy versus unhealthy oils, right? And then at the end of the day, what's most important when you're buying a C60 oil product? And then what's most important is you want to get a healthy oil, obviously. But the second one is you want to have high solubility. And the reason you want to have high solubility is because you're buying C60. You're not buying oil. It just has to come in oil. And so you want to have an oil that is really the best C60 oil you can find, because it's going to have the most amount of C60 in the oil, that's possible. And that's kind of the general idea here. And so let's kind of, jump right in and just talk about this. Now, right off the bat, your choices are, if you just I just did a quick scan, like what's out there, and you come back with all of these different kinds of oils, almond oil, avocado, black seed, camelina, CBD, hemp, MCT, etc. So there's a bunch of different choices. And so how does a consumer decide, what is the best one that what's the best one? And which one should I be taking? And which one should I be avoiding? And then if you make your own C60 oil, same issue, right? What are you going to mix your C60 oil with? And what are your choices? And what's good, what's bad, etc. So let's just jump right in. Here's the choices. That's what's out there in the market right now. But really at the end of the day, what's the most important thing? There's two important things, right? Health and solubility. So from a health standpoint, right now, it is it's loud, thunderous, amount of noise is coming out about how bad seed oils are. And so that's the one thing that's kind of overriding in the marketplace right now, is everyone's, switching to butter and lard, for cooking, and tallow and all of that stuff, and ghee, and just everyone's, the health people that are into health are avoiding seed oils. And so why? And so I got to tell you, honestly, before I got into this research, I didn't know why. I just, took it at face value. I kept seeing all these different YouTube videos and reels and you name it, and people I respect, saying, hey, seed oil bad, avoid it. I'm like, okay. And I don't eat seed oils anyway. It's been like for decades. I've been just using lard and tallow and things like that anyway, just my own personal preference, right? I don't trust highly processed anything. But here's the reason, and I'll give it to you real quick. This video is not about, seed oils, right? But the idea here is that the reason seed oils are bad, and this is what I found out, was because of linoleic acid, which is your omega-6. And it's not that acid in particular, but it's the amount of linoleic acid within the oil. And that's one of the biggest reasons why people are declaring seed oils are bad, is because a high concentration of linoleic acid, omega-6, will contribute to chronic inflammation, which will then create potential health risks like cardiovascular disease and other chronic conditions. And so there's kind of been this thing out in the marketplace. They call it the, quote, the hateful eight. And so the seed oils that are out there on the market that, all the health pundits are saying, don't eat this, like things like, sunflower oil, corn oil, canola oil, cottonseed oils, etc. These are all the seed oils that, the health pundits are saying, hey, you should avoid these, right? And when you take a look at these different oils and you look at their linoleic content, it starts to make sense. You got some really high ones out there. You got like safflower and grapeseed oil. There's 71% linoleic acid, and if that's the bad part of the oil, and it's 71%, that's not a good thing. So that's really, really bad. Next up is sunflower oil at 66%, corn oil 60%. So that is number one, is that linoleic acid, avoid if you can. Of course, we need our omega-3s and 6s, but not in high quantities, and that's what's really kind of jamming a lot of folks up as they take use oils, cooking oils and things like that are really high in this. And if you get a diet high in omega-6, you got problems. And so the other thing too that really popped out, and this is just real high level stuff, but I just want to point out that the seed oils are also bad because they're highly processed. They cause oxidative stress, which is that inflammation thing. They're frequently derived from genetically modified seeds, which, as we all know, is something that all the health people want to avoid. And then, of course, there's this other, other studies out there, they're showing that it negatively impact male fertility and maternal and fetal health in pregnant women. So, just those 4 bullet points alone is like, hey, and then you've got the linoleic acid thing. So just keeping in mind, mind that, because they're highly processed, they're using petroleum-based solvents to extract the seed, the oils from the seeds, and they're also using chemicals to preserve them, like BHA and BHT, to extend the shelf life. And so it's that stuff that you find in the grocery store that are most likely going to be these high processed seed oils, which are most likely going to be seed oils you want to avoid. And that's kind of what the health pundits are saying. So right off the bat, when we're talking about what's the best C60 oil, it's going to be, well, you really need to kind of just take the seed oils off the list right off the bat. Just take them off the list. And so what does that leave you in the marketplace and then options to mix your own C60 with? Well, at this point, then, you're looking at, okay, well, what are the other possibilities? Well, you've got avocado, MCT, and olive oil because it comes from the flesh of the fruit and it doesn't come from the seeds. Okay, so that's just a no-brainer right there. And a little point that I want to make about CBD oil is that CBD comes from a hemp plant, right? And it's basically an isolate that they mix in a carrier oil. So you don't know unless you ask, like, what is the carrier oil of the CBD product, because it could be any one of these oils. So you don't really know. So it's really kind of like take it off the list until you know what it's made with. And I make my own CBD oil and I use avocado oil. So just kind of give you an example, you can make CBD oil with any oil. Okay. So it really is kind of like, even though it's a choice out there in the marketplace, you really need to go, hey, what oil did you guys use, when you're selecting your oil? So right off the bat, let's talk about, hey, well, that's what's out there. And, if you start really kind of getting serious about your health, you're taking a supplement called C60, it's not cheap. Well, you want to pick the right oil, but there's a catch. And what's really interesting about this is I was chatting with Bob Greska from Greska's Carbon 60. Now, this is one of the longest established C60 companies that we have here in the United States. He's been selling anyway, just from the beginning meaning rat study days. And so the idea here was that, Bob's flagship product comes in sunflower oil. So I kind of wanted to go, hey, and I wanted to reach out to him and kind of just talk to him about that. And it turns out when I reached out to him that he's actually been addressing the bad seed oil problem because his product, it's got sunflower oil and people are avoiding it now. And so the thing that's interesting is that Bob kind of approached this challenge from a couple of different ways, and come to find out the sunflower oil he's using is not a bad version, which I didn't even realize that there was such a thing as a good and a bad seed oil. So anyway, I had a really quick chat with Bob yesterday, and I wanted to share that with you to kind of get his perspective on the idea and the concept of bad versus good seed oils, and then what his company itself, and he's done with his products to kind of address that whole healthy versus unhealthy oil. So let's bring Bob on and we'll move from there. All right. Well, hey, everybody, I got Bob Greska from Greska's Carbon 60 on the line. I just wanted to chat with him because he and I were kind of passing text messages back and forth a few weeks ago about seed oils. And so Bob's done some really great research on good versus bad seed oils, and that they're not all bad. And so, Bob, I just, thanks for, joining me, and just kind of wanted to get your take on what your research shows. Because, I know that, for the longest time, your product is carbon 60 and sunflower oil. And so now, obviously, because it's seed oil, people are starting to get worried because it's such a big health thing now, about seed oils. So I just thought, if you could just kind of share with me, like, what has your research found, and what are, what's Greska's carbon 60, how are you addressing those concerns in the marketplace about seed oils?
Well, we addressed them two different ways. Well, one is trying to educate people. It's not, yeah, it's true. Most seed oils are bad because they have a high omega-6 content. But sunflower oil, there's two types of sunflower oils, one with a low omega-6 and one with a high omega-6. Now, 85% omega-6 in a sunflower oil is not good for you. And that's what most of the seed oils are out there, the sunflower seed oil is. But the one we particularly chose to deal with and work with and put in our product is Hain Celestial, which has a very low omega-6 content. It's lower than your olive oil. It's lower than your avocado oil. It's down around 6% plus or minus 1%, somewhere in that ballpark, around 6%. Whereas your avocado oil and your olive oil, they're about 10 to 15% omega-6. So actually, the sunflower oil with the low omega-6, it actually has a high omega-9, which is the oleic acid, where omega-6 is linoleic acid. So a high omega-9 sunflower oil is actually very heart healthy for you. So that's why we chose it, and that's why we do it. And then the other approach we're doing is due to popular perception, public perception, we can't change it because everybody says seed oils are bad, seed oils are bad, and they
Yeah.
look as all seed oils are bad. Well, unless it's a linoleic acid, the omega-6 is bad in it. So we introduced, dude, you can't change public perception too easily. So we introduced carbon 60 in an olive oil. We found a good olive oil that we like, and but olive oil always comes in a brown bottle as you see it in the
Uh-huh.
store, and sunflower oil comes in a clear plastic bottle. Well, that's because the olive oil is subject to sunlight degradation, where the sunflower oil is not. So sunflower oil has a longer shelf life. It has zero taste compared to the peppery burn taste that you get with the high quality olive oils. And
Yeah.
we have that in our olive oil too. There's a little peppery burn taste to it in the back of your throat, but that's subject to the olive oil. So that's just the way good olive oil is. It has a high polyphenol content. So so we have a choice on our website, either olive oil or sunflower oil. So take your choice. But I prefer the sunflower oil by far because it has a longer shelf life, no taste. And it's got a lower omega-6 count.
Okay, so awesome. So you've got a brand new product now, just to kind of, put people at ease if they get a choice now, right? So awesome on the new product. Great. And then, but the question I've got though is, for your sunflower product, how do they, produce a sunflower oil that's low in omega-6? And do you have like, if people were worried about it, do you like provide a certification on the oil that you sell
Right.
that you provide? I mean, how's that work? I mean, because to me, in my research, it just showed that anything that was mass produced, seed oils, are really bad because they're just the way that they're produced. So are you like buying like directly from farms? And I mean, how do you do it that you can
Oh,
find
no,
a low
we
omega-6 seed
yeah,
oil?
we buy directly from Hanes Celestial,
Oh, okay.
and they are a big producer of oils, but all kinds of oils. But the sunflower seed oil, they knew way back when that the omega-6s were high, and they've actually seeked out high oleic acid, high omega-9 sunflower oil. So that's what they produce, and that's what we buy from them. It's organic, it's clean, comes in a clear bottle, and you can see through it. It's so that's we just go with their source, and I don't know. They do not use solvents. A lot of these mass-produced sunflower seed oils or seed oils, they use hexane, which is a solvent. So we have a totally solvent-free product.
Hmm.
So we have no solvents in the production of the carbon 60 and no solvents in um, the production of the sunflower oil. So it's pretty clean.
Okay, no, that's awesome. That's great to hear. I knew that, you're definitely an exception to the rule because of the painstaking effort you put in getting a quality oil. And that I think a lot of people don't even realize that there is such a thing as good versus bad seed oil. You know.
Well,
So
this
yeah.
is true, but if you read between the lines and read in depth and do the research, it's the linoleic acid, which is the omega-6, which is the high concentration, that makes it the bad seed oil. So, and we just use one with a very low linoleic acid content, high oleic acid, high omega-9.
Okay. And so when you were looking for an olive oil for your olive oil product, is it you'd mentioned to me earlier that you had tested several different olive oils and discovered a wide range of the content of oleic acid in the different samples. Can you comment on that in terms of like, choosing a product that's in olive oil, but then how do you know how good of an olive oil it is?
Well, the good, you can tell by tasting it, it has that peppery burn in your back
Okay.
of your
Yeah.
throat. That's high polyphenol content.
Uh-huh.
And all the olive oils, they're 10 to 15% omega-6. So, they are higher. They're twice as high as the sunflower oil we use.
Okay.
So, but another thing too is you look at the volume of our product versus anybody else's. Anybody else's carbon 60 product, you're taking 2 teaspoons. With our product, you're only taking an eighth of a teaspoon. So you're really getting, 16 times less of the oil consumption, whether you choose the olive oil or the sunflower oil. So it's a very little, very, very small amount. It's, almost negligible
Yeah.
concern.
Oh yeah. Oh no, that's great. Because yeah, in my opinion, I look at also, for the folks that are creating lipofullerenes, My whole point is you want to get the highest solubility, because you're not buying oil, you're buying C60, and you want to limit the amount of oil you intake, and to get the biggest bang for your buck on the C60 itself, right?
Correct.
So yeah, okay. So, what are your thoughts on solubility in terms of like the best oils for light
Well, they
marines?
say that the olive oil is the best solubility, which are
Correct.
traditional carbon, electric arc solvent extraction technique, which all carbon 60 producers use that method. They use the carbon arc solvent extraction technique, and some people clean it up with vacuum oven drying. Some people sublimate it too, but they still never get all the solvents out. When they do that, they still have trace amounts of solvents. And so in the particles, actually, when the solvents dry off or evaporate or go away, they all the particles cluster together, so they're very large. So they get limited solubility, and I imagine that's why the reason it causes a limited solubility, because it can only get so much carbon 60, like 0.8 grams per liter. But we don't have a restriction since our particle size is much smaller, 200,000 times smaller. We
Uh-huh.
have actually truly 20 nanometer particle size, where all these other processes have 1,000 to 2,000 nanometer in size. So they're much larger. So we don't have any problem with solubility, because our particles are so small, they go into what we call a colloidal suspension. It's really not a dissolved solution. It's a colloidal suspension.
Okay.
Our
Yeah.
part is different because the smallness of the size of the particles.
Yeah, definitely a different approach towards C60 oil, but
Yeah.
definitely works. You've got great testimonials on your sites, and a lot of customers really love your product. So, yeah, that's great. I really appreciate your take on that. I just wanted to make sure people were aware that there is such a thing as, good seed oil, but it's just
Yep.
really hard to find. You're not going to find it in a grocery store.
No,
But
no, no. We
yeah,
if you want to find good seed oil, sunflower oil, go get Spectrum organic sunflower oil. That is made by Hain Celestial.
okay, all right,
So
no,
that's the one, Spectrum. That's a good sunflower oil. Another thing too is, they're talking people with these oils when they do their testing, they're cooking with them. They're sort of heating them up at high temperatures, which actually changes all the properties. So if you're taking them raw or not heated, or just out of the bottle, they're not a problem. It's when you heat them that really causes a lot of the changes. So
Is
that's a
that
factor
is
too.
that heating is that heating up to and beyond the smoke point, or if you keep it lower than the smoke point,
Well, the
it's
smoke
not
point is when it starts
carcinogenic,
to
right?
smoke. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But heating it up to high temperatures like three,
Yeah.
400 degrees. The smoke point's usually like 460, something like that, somewhere in that ballpark for most all these plant oils, as we call them.
Hmm.
So they're all in the 460 kind of Fahrenheit temperature range. But even if you heat them up to 300, you're now changing the properties of the seed oil itself, or the olive oil, or the plant oil.
Right. So definitely not to cook with, but you can definitely take it with C60 in a like basically a room temperature, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
you store your products at room temperature, right? Is that
That's
what?
correct. We
Okay.
don't recommend refrigeration because that
Okay.
cycling of the refrigerator that turns on and off every hour, let's say,
Uh-huh.
that since we're in a colloidal suspension, that drops it out quicker.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
it
Okay.
still drops out. We're in a colloidal suspension, but it takes a couple of years to drop out. So, it's a very slow process. And it will drop out to a cloud at the bottom of the bottle, about the bottom third of the bottle. It won't drop out to like a crusty layer at the bottom, but it drops out to a cloud, but that takes a couple of years. So
Okay.
it's such a slow process.
Okay. Well, hey, appreciate you. Thanks for providing, just a little bit of insight. I definitely wanted to add that, add your comment to this video because it's such an important issue for people that are looking for better health. And, obviously they're turning towards C60 and knowing what's the best oils to take with C60 or, to use to make their own C60 oil. Really important topic. So thank you very much, Bob. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
your time.
Very good. Thanks, Kay.
Well, there you go. And thank you again, Bob, for joining me on this video and just sharing your insights. It's really valuable and I appreciate your time. But I do want to kind of point out a couple of things that he said, and what he did also bring up, which I think is something that a lot of us don't think about. But, this whole idea behind solvent free, where he's really adamant about using solvent free, and so are other companies, solvent free C60. But then Bob really introduced another idea here that I don't think anyone really talks about, and that are you getting solvent-free oil? So it's kind of an important thing because if we're doing this for our health, and everybody, if you're worried about solvent-free C60, it might be time to start asking about the solvent-free oil that's being added the C60 is being added to. So there's one thought I want to leave you with. And the other thought that I realized I forgot to ask Bob about, but he did bring up the issue of what container that the oil comes in. And so he mentioned, amber bottles and because of the light. But one of the things I do want to point out, and for those of you who've been, who know, is that, plastic bottles are really, really not good. Especially when they contain oil, because what's oil? Oil is a combination of fatty acid esters, and what are acids? Well, they're going to basically dissolve slowly over time. They're going to basically, leach chemicals out of that plastic, and it ends up in the oil. And so if you look into it, you'll hear about something called phthalates, which is what oil will pull out of the bottles, and phthalates are very toxic to us. So right off the bat, you really want to be aware of, like what Bob was saying, was making sure that it's got the oil that you're selecting is low in linoleic acid, the omega-6. Also, you want to make sure that it's organic, non-GMO, but that also too, that they're getting their oil. And what does it come in? Does it come in metal tins, barrels? But if it comes in plastics, then that's a huge issue. That because it's sold to you in glass, but what did they get it in? And there's actually one C60 manufacturer, C60 oil manufacturer, that's been out there for years, and they basically promote their product as the best price C60 out there. And they tout that they're using Kirkland oil from olive oil from Costco. And you got to think about that, because Kirkland olive oil in Costco comes in plastic bottles. And if that's the product they're using, and even though, Costco swears by the fact that their olive oil is authentic, but it comes in plastic jugs, and then that's then turned into a product. So there's kind of a lot of homework here that you could imagine having to kind of think about in terms of, are you getting the healthiest oil you can get when you're buying and or making your C60 product. So enough about that. Let's jump into solubility. Now, one of the things about solubility right off the bat is, when I went looking for, and I did a really deep dive on trying to find peer-reviewed, studies that have touched on the subject of what are the best oils to mix with C60 from the standpoint of solubility. Again, going back to the idea that you're out there trying to buy C60, you're not buying oil. It comes with C60, and that's why you got to worry about it. But really, though, you want to get an oil that's going to hold the most amount of C60 in it, so that you get the biggest bang for your buck. So solubility, which is the amount of C60 that can dissolve into that oil, is a big deal for that very purpose. And so now let me share with you a couple of studies that I did run across that do touch on the subject. One of them is in a journal called Medical Chemistry and Pharmacological Potential of Fullerenes and Carbon Nanotubes. It's a Springer publication, chapter 13 of this book. And if you want to read these studies, I'll put links in the video description below. But in chapter 13, the title of that study on page 317 of the book, of the journal, is the titled Solubility of Fullerenes and Fatty Acid Esters, a New Way to Deliver in Vivo Fullerenes, Theoretical Calculations and Experimental Results. Now, the way that the biochemists in this study approached the idea of what is the best soluble oil for C60 is they did it mathematically. And so basically what they did was they studied all of the different parameters, the fatty ester parameters of various oil types, and did their calculations based on their known calculations for solubility in different fatty acid esters, and then they did their math and they came up with this formula. And if you read this, and if you read the actual study, which is what I'm scrolling through on the screen, you'll see that they did a lot of math. They did a lot of studies of C60, C70, C76, all these different various fullerenes, and what their solubility parameters were based on their molecular configurations and so forth, and they came up with a lot of math. And I'm not a biochemist, so I can't really get into the full the actual formulas they came up with, but this is the formula that they came up with, and then they went and applied that to different oils in terms of calculation. So what the study shows, this particular study, is that it did show, and this is what the biochemists are claiming, is it is shown that the solubility of fullerenes in vegetable oils can be predicted and justified on the basis of solubility parameters of C60 and C70 and of the glycol esters of fatty acids. And then they state, it appears that the best calculation approach for the prediction of the solubility of fullerenes in free fatty acids and in fatty acids derivatives is granted by equation. So they were pretty adamant that they had basically figured out, and they cracked the code on basically determining what the best soluble oil was for C60 and C70 simply by calculation. So when they actually ran the numbers, they calculated that oil or olive oil was the number one soluble oil that you could mix C60 with based on the calculations that it came out with. They basically said in their formulas, they predicted that the max solubility of C60 in olive oil was 909 milligrams per milliliter. And the next two that followed that in terms of the high end of the scale was peanut and brassica, which is rapeseed oil. So peanut came in at 751 milligrams per liter, and brassica came out at 859. So these three out of the 7 that they tested were really high in terms of, hey, these are really good oils to use because they can contain a lot of C70. And it also kind of transforms over here to C70 if that's your thing. So that's a really interesting data point in the discussion was, these biochemists, they did their homework, they figured out a formula, and they came out and said, hey, you know what? The best one is olive oil. Right behind that is brassica, and the one behind that's peanut oil in terms of high solubility. And so now how do you corroborate that and say, well, what happens if you really actually, stir it together? What happens? And so here we go. I want to point out this study, and this is the one that everyone's most familiar with. This is the 2012 Paris study that kind of kicked off C60 being a supplement. The study is called The Prolongation of Lifespan by Rats by Repeated Oral Administration of C60 Fullerene. Okay, so this is that whole study, that the rats live twice as long, blah, blah, blah. But the thing about this study was that, this is the preparation process that these scientists used in order to produce the C60 in olive oil that they gave the rats, which a lot of us are taking. A lot of us are, if you're taking C60 in olive oil, it was made this way because this became the literal benchmark formula that almost all manufacturers are following, is this process by which, these scientists had created their C60 oil. So it kind of became the main recipe for what everyone is following. But at the end of the day, after they measured their C60 oil from the process that they had created to make it, they just, their end product that they fed their rats, which is why it's the benchmark, right, is C60 dissolved in olive oil. It ended up being, and this was a measured, actually doing it in real life and not calculated, but they came out with 0.8, so 0.8 milligrams per milliliter was kind of like, that became the benchmark. That's what everyone should shoot for. So here you've got, by calculation, the scientists in the other study said, hey, we calculate that, you can get 909 milligrams per liter, which translates to 0.909 milligrams per milliliter. So they were saying you should at least be able to get 0.9 milligrams per milliliter by calculation. And then when scientists actually did it, they came out with 0.8 milligrams per milliliter. So it's pretty close. That's like 0.1 off. And so, it kind of gives some credence to the idea that the calculations are fairly accurate because in real life, they came within 0.1 milligrams per milliliter in terms of, they actually creating the oil that, the C60 oil that they used in the study. So there's a lot of credence you can give to some of the, to the numbers in this study because of the fact that it corroborates with the actual physical results in this other study. But then I also want to point out that there was one other study that did pop up in the literature, and I don't want to be, I just want to be real clear and transparent that there's this other study out there that was only one of the other ones that I could find, and I went through dozens trying to find, specific studies on C60 and different oils, and there's only like 2, and this was the other one. But this one, I just got to really point out that I'm not including it in the discussion because their numbers are so bizarre. I don't understand where they went. Well, did they go wrong or not? But it just doesn't make any sense. So, and the reason I'm kind of hesitating to use this as part of our discussion was the way that these scientists had used it. And if anybody wants to look at it, I'll put a link in the video description. And I'd love to get your feedback on it. But this study is called Olive Oil as a Biocompatible Solvent for Pristine C60. Okay, so they wanted to study the solubility of C60 in olive oil, and they also wanted to study it in sunflower oil. So they picked 2 different oils, 3 different brands of oil per oil, right? So 3 different brands of olive oil, 3 different brands of sunflower oil. Then they wanted to try it at 3 different temperatures. But the thing that was really weird in this study was they tried to do it with 14 milligrams of C60 in 5 milliliters of olive oil. And so if you figure out what that is, that comes out to, they put 2.8 milligrams per milliliter of C60 in there, but they only stirred it for 72 hours. Right, and they only stirred it for 72 hours, and then they used a centrifuge afterwards. So, for all of us that make C60, and if you look at the benchmark, which is, this is the benchmark process, they stir for 2 weeks. And so these guys only stirred for 72 hours, and then they centrifuged it. So there's no, so that's really kind of the common sense reason why I'm not using this study as part of the discussion, because when they did that, they didn't do it the way everyone else is doing it. They only stirred for 72 hours, and when they spinned out when they spin the oil, a lot of that C60 hadn't had time to dissolve into the oil, and it spun out and ended up at the bottom of the tube in the centrifuge. But what they did discover was that that their best solubility was 5.97 micrograms per milliliter. And so a microgram, if you look at what is 5.97 micrograms? Well, that in micrograms per milliliter. Well, if you did some math on it, that means that their end product, or of their end result, this one study determined that their best result in olive oil was a 0.00597 milligrams per milliliter. So 0.00597 is a far cry from 0.8, and in the rat study, 0.9 by calculation. So they definitely screwed up, in terms of trying to get the best results. And they just did a quick 3-day stir, and then they got the weakest results, which is a real good reminder to all of you out there. If you're making your own, you really do need to stir for 2 weeks. But nonetheless, okay, let's say, their study doesn't fit into my discussion on what the best oils are, because they didn't try really hard to try to get the oil to dissolve. They just did a quick study. But what's interesting, though, is that they did find out a couple of things that I do kind of want to point out that I think are fascinating. That they discovered that, in 72 hours, that the higher the temperature, the lower the amount, which is the exact opposite if you do it longer. Because I've discovered that the longer you stir is the right way to do it, right? Just follow the benchmark. But the higher the temperature, the better the results. And so this was kind of an odd backwards discovery, in terms of higher temperatures, better results. When they did it, they got higher temperatures, worse results. But then at the same time, I think the most important thing that comes out of this study was that it's not any olive oil that's going to be a good candidate for solubility. Same with sunflower oil. When they tested 3 different brands, they got 3 different results in both types of oils. And what's even more interesting was that a particular brand of sunflower oil from a brand called Venus actually had more C60 dissolved in it than the olive oil. So, so it's just so fascinating. When you read all these different studies on how different people approach things, and you try to kind of, do this apples to apples comparison. But at the end of the day, I did throw this study out, but I did want to mention it because I know you guys and you're so smart. Someone's going to go, but what about this other study? And so here's that other study. But here's one more thing that you may not be aware of, was that somewhere back in time, and I don't remember what time, I'm kind of a pack rat of information, and somewhere back in time, somewhere in one of our chat groups, in our C60 chat group, somebody did a study, and one of you guys, and if you're watching this, hey, it'd be great to find out who you are, because your name's not on the document, but there's a document that I discovered one of the members of our chat group actually did a C60 solubility study in his home. And he did a thorough, very impressive job. And so now this C60 study, he just called the Homemade C60 Dilution Evaluation in Various Oils. He started in November of 2018, and he updated his study when he repeated it in April of 2019. I'm assuming it's a he. Okay, but what's real interesting is that he kind of was very adamant about following the benchmark results. He used red line pulverized C60. He stirred it at 20 degrees centigrade, which was the recommendation that Red Line puts out for their C60. He stirred for 3 weeks, let it rest for 10, filtered it, just like the rat study guys did, and then his concentration was zero point 0.8 grams per liter, which is 0.8 milligrams per milliliter. So he followed the benchmark recipe formula. And then what his results were, which is what's real interesting, is his results were that, and he just did it by eyeball. Okay, so by eyeball, meaning coloration, and also by eyeball what's left over, how much C60 is left over in the bottom of the beaker after he was finished stirring. And so if you kind of take a look at his study, he actually shares his notes per different types of oils. He tried 3 different oils, and then he basically documented the residual C60 remaining on the filters as well as in the bottle of the jars after processing, and then he also compares that to the different colorations of the oils once he was finished with the results. So even though he wasn't, obviously he's just like myself, we don't own all the equipment you need to actually do an actual physical measurement, but what he did was, by just simply looking at the amount of residue, he discovered that the high oleic sunflower oil, which is sort of what Bob's using, right? And grapeseed oil, there was no C60 remaining, that all of it got dissolved into the oil so that there was nothing left at the bottom of the jar after mixing. And he kind of rates it from low to high, where the next one up was sesame, and the bottom one here was walnut oil, where it had the most amount of leftover C60. So can we use this study to determine whether or not these oils are soluble? Absolutely. It's how I do it. Whatever's left is what didn't get, so it's a great way to look at it. It's like, how much C60 is left? If there's nothing left, that oil is really soluble. So there you go. So this is one more data point towards our discussion about solubility in terms of like, what are the best oils? So if you want to read this study, I'll put a link in the video description. So the last thing I kind of want to add on is a wild card. It's not an oil. It's a fatty acid called oleic acid, just by itself. Now, we know from prior discussions that olive oil, for instance, is comprised of 6 or 7 different fatty acid esters, and one of those fatty acid esters is oleic oil, which is omega-9. And if it's really high in omega-9, that's a good thing, versus high in omega-6 is a bad thing, but omega-9 is a good thing. So having it high in oleic acid is a very, very healthy oil. And so what's interesting about that is that there's actually a product out there that's just made in C60 in oleic acid. And it's kind of interesting that someone would just actually pluck out one specific fatty acid out of olive oil and say, hey, that's the one I'm going to use for the product. And it's no other than Ian Mitchell from Wizard Sciences. Now, for those of you who recognize his name, Ian Mitchell was one of the top leading C60 scientists in the world. I mean, you got Bob Greska out there, and you've got Ian Mitchell, and you've got a couple others. But there are literally only less than a handful of these guys who understand C60 beyond anyone else understanding it. And so what's really cool about what Ian has produced at Wizard Sciences was that one of his products that he's called Vortex RX for Pets, he's made it purely with oleic acid. If you see here, right here on the label, and that's what he's using. He's not using olive oil or any other type of oil. He's using a fatty acid. And so when you take a look at that, you're like, wow, that's really, really interesting that he would choose that. But just for the fact that who he is and that he chose it to use in a product, I think is a definite data point in this discussion as to what's the best soluble. Because if anybody knows what's the best soluble oil, or let's say in this case, fatty acid for C60, it's going to be Ian Mitchell. And just kind of give you an idea here, when you take a look at olive oil, well, olive oil could be anywhere from 55 to 83% oleic acid, depending on where you get it from. And then avocado oil is equally as high in oleic acid. So it can be anywhere from 50 to 70% oleic acid, and that's avocado oil. So it kind of gives you the really, I think that, by Ian's kind of like divulging, he kind of found like this thing out there that works really well with C60. He's the only one doing it this way, but just the fact that he did it. And then when you say, well, how does olive oil and avocado oil stand up against oleic acid? Then you realize, well, the majority of what they're made of. So why wouldn't that be a really good thing, since we know that these are really two good soluble oils for C60? So it kind of all comes full circle on that. And I just wanted to really add it in because it's kind of a wild card. No one else is doing this, and I found it to be fascinating when I was doing research on who's using what oils, that there was a product out there that wasn't even using an actual oil. It was just using a fatty acid ester. So I wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of that and just want to share it with you. So anyway, at the end of the day, in conclusion, and thank you for hanging out in the video this long, but in conclusion, I just want to say that based on the research, based on what the studies show, based on what people have done, based on what people are doing in the marketplace, like Bob Greska and Ian Mitchell, and based on all of that information and the amount of time that I put into this, and you can read the studies for yourself, go for it. I put the links in. But the best oils, pending further research, the best oils for C60, based on being a healthy oil and a high soluble healthy oil, then what you're going to want to look for when you're buying it, or if you're mixing your own, is you definitely want to stick to a high quality olive oil, avocado oil, because of its oleic acid content, or just going straight with oleic acid. And I'm telling you right now, because I read that thing from Ian, I'm real interested in making C60 with oleic acid now. But that's definitely one of them out there that you could use. And then also too, when you're looking at seed oils, that there are really good soluble seed oils, but again, it needs to be low omega-6 solvent-free seed oils. And then if you're going to use seed oils, then definitely you're going to want to use, based on the studies, that brassica, which is rapeseed oil, is really good for C60. Grapeseed oil, peanut oil, and sunflower oil are all really, really good soluble oils for C60, but make sure that it is low in omega-6 and solvent-free. So there you go. That's the list, and those are the best oils for C60 for health and for solubility. So thank you very much for sticking out this long on the video. I hope you found this interesting. I love doing research projects like this, and I learned so much, and my whole channel is all about, I do this stuff. This is my hobby, and I just really like to share it with people, because if I find it interesting, I know there's a few people out in the world that'll find it just as interesting. So there you go. That's my result of my research. Love to get your comments on what you think about it. Thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate your time. Now, if you got any questions about C60, making it, or any kind of questions, I do have a Telegram chat group called C60 Biohackers on Telegram. There'll be a link in the video description below if you'd like to join us. And you can also find more information about me and about C60. I have a huge section on my blog just dedicated to C60, and you can find that at the Tinkers Academy. Just type in tinkers.academy in your URL window, and it'll go right there on WordPress. And if you like this type of content, please like and subscribe, support the channel, all that. You've heard it before, so thank you so much. I hope you found this interesting, and I just wish you have a great day. Aloha.